Do you feel that the police could have done anything more to have helped you?
I could have found my daughter.
Devil triumphs when good men do naught.
When someone kicks down your front door, kills the dog and rapes the wife, who are you gonna call?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be the West Yorkshire police. They'd already be in there, wouldn't they?
Red Riding, the trilogy, coming soon on 4.
I'm James Marsh, and I'm both a documentary filmmaker and a fiction filmmaker. And I started off making documentaries and then moved into fiction when I lived and worked in America. And so I've gone between both documentaries and drama over the course of my career. And I started, I guess the first film I made that had any kind of visibility was a film called Wisconsin Death Trip, which was a drama doc I made in the late 90s. And I made a feature in America called The King. I've just made a film called Man on Wire, which is a documentary that has quite a lot of reconstructions and dramatic elements within it. And my last film is a film called 1980, which is part of the Red Riding trilogy that Channel 4 are going to be putting on in March.
Now, Man on Wire has just won a BAFTA. Very exciting.
Indeed.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
Was it a difficult decision to move away from documentaries and back into drama?
No, it's a real privilege. I find it kind of strange that more documentary filmmakers don't, or not perceived to be able to make fictional films, because the way we tell stories is actually very difficult. You know, it's very much the way I make documentary films. It's very much based in narrative and storytelling, and that's a sort of skill, if you like, that you refine, that is very applicable to the world of fiction. But there are obviously people who have gone from one to the other, not always successfully. But what's interesting is that someone like Werner Herzog, for example, took and made a series of brilliant fictional films, sometimes inspired by real life, sometimes not. And he's ended up being a kind of more of a documentary filmmaker. So you can go the other way too, that you can start making fiction and find yourself being drawn into the world of documentary and what that does for you. I mean, I think ultimately it's about trying to get at the truth of something, whether it's dramatic, poetic, or in documentary case, a real truth. But there is a crossover, maybe not as much as there could be or should be.
It seems a long way from Man on Wire. Why did you want to do the Red Riding project?
Well, I was aware of the books, and I just happened to meet the writer, Tony Grissoni, who wrote 3 screenplays for 3 separate films, and he just started working on that when I met him. And he alluded to them kind of cryptically that was something he was really kind of into doing. And I knew Andrew Eaton, who is the producer of the Red Riding series, and he and I go back a long way. And I used to actually be his researcher when he was a director. So I used to find things out for him, and we used to play football together, more to the point. So Andrew and Tony sort of gave me the first draft of the first script, and I loved it. I thought it was just exceptionally well written, unlike anything I'd read before that was set in the UK. It felt like a whole other kind of almost like a new genre that Tony had kind of discovered through David. And then it was 2 years whilst the project sort of went through various drafts. And I ended up making not that script, but the middle film, 1980, which speaks for itself. It's set in 1980, and the film I made is a very clever interweaving of the real-life hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper and the arrest of the Yorkshire Ripper, and a kind of a very fictional tale of police corruption that surrounds the Ripper inquiry. So mine is very much infused by real events.
The books are set in Yorkshire, but did you ever think about filming in another part of the country?
There's no way you could shoot a David Peace novel and shoot it anywhere other than New Yorkshire. I mean, they're so rooted in his, I think, growing up there, and his view of that Yorkshire Ripper case, for example. I'm sure as a child, I'm not sure how old he is, but as a child, I'm sure he'd been steeped in that, living in that community. I think he grew up in Ossett. So it was inconceivable not to shoot them where they were set. And 1980 is set largely in Leeds and the surrounding areas of Leeds. And in fact, I ended up shooting a lot of the film in Bradford because it's been less developed. And we found locations and buildings and environments that felt they were more of that time. But no, we could not have filmed anywhere else. It would have been ludicrous, really. Local casting. We had a great local cast of people, great local extras. Just the kind of the world that you're in there what David has done is created a kind of world that's very convincing, both as a kind of real Yorkshire environment, but then he brilliantly creates a kind of thriller that you couldn't imagine could be set anywhere other than in Yorkshire, but it has all of the great aspects of the American policier procedural. He's managed to kind of take that genre and set it completely organically in Yorkshire. And that's the beauty of the books for me, is they're very Yorkshire based. They're very much infused by the local context, and yet they are, great thrillers that don't feel pretentious, or they should be set in America or some. It hasn't got that kind of problem. We're trying to create American genre in England. It's organic to the environment he describes in the books, and Tony, brilliantly achieved in the writing of the scripts. So, they have to be set there. They're defined by that, and there's a kind of mentality in the books that's very much a Yorkshire mentality. And I hope we've caught that in the film, and that's why I spent 5 weeks in pre-production in Yorkshire and then 5 weeks shooting the film, and it was a very interesting and rewarding kind of time that we had there.
Was it easy to find the locations you needed?
Yes, it was actually. I said we went to Bradford to find many of our locations because it's been less developed, as I mentioned. But actually what I was after was not something that was like a British heritage film. That's sort of for me the enemy, if you like, or not the enemy, it's the wrong word. The British heritage film feels like a cosy invention. And what I was after in 1980 was something that was real, but also, dare I say it, mythical. So in 1980, there's lots of brutalist buildings around from the 60s and 70s. I wanted to set the film amongst that kind of world, not cosy cottages and the Yorkshire Dales and the sort of pleasing heritage version of Yorkshire. It was wanted something that felt real and real in a surprising way. And so we used lots of contemporary 70s buildings, lots of brutalist architecture to kind of express what is a very, very brutal world. If you look at the footage of the time, the main police station in Yorkshire is a very ugly, imposing, sinister building, and we found something that very much approximated to that. Actually, that was in Leeds we found that building. So the idea was to go completely away from heritage filmmaking and make something that was kind of monumental and mythical, and yet very sort of specific to Leeds and Bradford.
What about the talent pool in Yorkshire? Did you have any problem finding the crew you needed for a project like this?
No, I didn't know. We weren't in any way we didn't feel lacking in anything when we were there, and we used obviously a local crew. A lot of our crew were based in Yorkshire. 1 or 2 people came from London and Manchester, but by and large it was a local crew, and it was just a really good experience to be working with people who knew the sort of their way around.
No project is without its own little dramas. What was the biggest anxiety for you in making this?
The weather was the one big challenge.
Good old Yorkshire weather.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually we liked it overcast. It was just it wasn't so much the weather interrupting the film. We made it very uncomfortable at times. We just get drenched every day, and when it wasn't raining, we had brought the rain in. On the rare occasion when it wasn't raining, we had a rain machine to create the rain. So my abiding memory of it was just being wet every day. But the weather will work for us. We liked overcast skies. It gives you a very flat, good light. In fact, sunlight is not always the best thing for a film, and it's very true to the climate, of course, of Yorkshire. That was the main challenge, I think, was the weather. And just always the challenge is, you're trying to do too much in too little time, and that's always the way with a film. And
finally, what next for, I was going to say, James, the BAFTA-winning James
Indeed.
Marsh? What next for James Marsh?
Well, who knows? I tend to sort of have a very blinkered professional life. I stay with the one thing I'm doing and don't look ahead, which is a kind of not a great way to organise your future or your career. I think I'm going to make a documentary film next. Having just made Red Riding, it's a full-on feature drama with actors and everything. It's nice to kind of just change again and go make a documentary and go back into that world.